Okay, try this again. Let's see how this is gonna work. Um, my camera keeps shifting. Let's see if that'll help. But yeah, apparently I started streaming to the wrong spot. Oops. So today, my back hurts. I'm not gonna be able to sit up on my chair for long enough. So I need to do some typing up for the patterns and things. So I was going to um, what are you talking about, Josiah? Mode in Klingon. And well, you're good at confusing me in Klingon, I guess. um, so I started to stream up in the wrong spot, so yay. I'm smart. This is professional operation, guys. You should know that. Either way, my back hurts. I'm not going to be able to sit up in the... Why is my camera so funny? Like, what did I do? There. There. That's better, right? That's better. Um, so I was just going to do some typing that I need to get done for some patterns and projects that I wanted to do, and listen to the book still. I've got planned chapters 8 to 14 of whatever the heck, however you pronounce that word, by Voltaire. And because I am good at pronunciation, you know. Aww. I love you too. Eek. Um, so I hope you enjoy, and we'll catch you on the other end.
This is a LibriVox recording. Candide by Voltaire. Chapter 8. The History of Cunegonde. I was in bed fast asleep when it pleased God to send the Bulgarians to our delightful castle of Thunderton Trunk. They slew my father and brother, and cut my mother in pieces. A tall Bulgarian, 6 feet high, perceiving that I had fainted away at this sight, began to ravish me. This made me recover. I regained my senses. I cried, I struggled, I bit, I scratched. I wanted to tear out the tall Bulgarian's eyes, not knowing that what happened at my father's house was the usual practice of war. The brute gave me a cut in the left side with his hanger, and the mark is still upon me. Ah, I hope I shall see it, said honest Candide. You shall, said Cunegonde, but let us continue. Do so, replied Candide. Thus she resumed the thread of her story. A Bulgarian captain came in, saw me all bleeding, and the soldier not in the least disconcerted. The captain flew into a passion at the disrespectful behavior of the brute, and slew him on my body. He ordered my wounds to be dressed, and took me to his quarters as a prisoner of war. I washed the few shirts that he had. I did his cooking. He thought me very pretty. He avowed it. On the other hand, I must own he had a good shape and a soft and white skin, but he had little or no mind or philosophy, and you might see plainly that he had never been instructed by Dr. Pangloss. In 3 months' time, having lost all his money, and being grown tired of my company, he sold me to a Jew named Don Issachar, who traded to Holland and Portugal, and had a strong passion for women. This Jew was much attached to my person, but could not triumph over it. I resisted him better than the Bulgarian soldier. A modest woman may be ravished once, but her virtue is strengthened by it. In order to render me more tractable, he brought me to his country house. Hitherto I had imagined that nothing could equal the beauty of Thunder Ten Tronckh Castle, but I found I was mistaken. The Grand Inquisitor, seeing me one day at Mass, stared long at me, and sent to tell me that he wished to speak on private matters. I was conducted to his palace, where I acquainted him with the history of my family, and he represented to me how much it was beneath my rank to belong to an Israelite. A proposal was then made to Don Issachar that he should resign me to my lord. Don Issachar, being the court banker and a man of credit, would hear nothing of it. The Inquisitor threatened him with an auto da fe. At last my Jew, intimidated, concluded a bargain by which the house and myself should belong to both in common. The Jew should have for himself Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday, and the Inquisitor should have the rest of the week. It is now 6 months since this agreement was made. Quarrels have not been wanting, for they could not decide whether the night from Saturday to Sunday belonged to the old law or to the new. For my part, I have so far held out against both, and I verily believe that this is the reason why I am still beloved. At length, to avert the scourge of earthquakes, and to intimidate Don Issachar, my Lord Inquisitor was pleased to celebrate an auto da fe. He did me the honor to invite me to the ceremony. I had a very good seat, and the ladies were served with refreshments between Mass and the execution. I was, in truth, seized with horror at the burning of those 2 Jews, and of the honest Biscayner who had married his godmother. But what was my surprise, my fright, my trouble, when I saw in a San Benito and mitre a figure which resembled that of Pangloss. I rubbed my eyes. I looked at him attentively. I saw him hung. I fainted. Scarcely had I recovered my senses than I saw you stripped, stark naked, and this was the height of my horror, consternation, grief, and despair. I tell you truthfully that your skin is yet whiter and of a more perfect color than that of my Bulgarian captain. This spectacle redoubled all the feelings which overwhelmed and devoured me. I screamed out, and would have said, "Stop, barbarians!" but my voice failed me, and my cries would have been useless after you had been severely whipped. "How is it possible," said I, "that the beloved Candide and the wise Pangloss should both be at Lisbon, the one to receive 100 lashes, and the other to be hanged by the Grand Inquisitor, of whom I am the well-beloved? Pangloss most cruelly deceived me when he said that everything in the world is for the best. Agitated, lost, sometimes beside myself, and sometimes ready to die of weakness, my mind was filled with the massacre of my father, mother, and brother, with the insolence of the ugly Bulgarian soldier, with the stab that he gave me, with my servitude under the Bulgarian captain, with my hideous Don Issachar, with my abominable Inquisitor, with the execution of Dr. Pangloss, with the grand miserere to which they whipped you, and especially with the kiss I gave you behind the screen the day that I had last seen you. I praised God for bringing you back to me after so many trials, and I charged my old woman to take care of you, and to conduct you hither as soon as possible. She has executed her commission perfectly well. I have tasted the inexpressible pleasure of seeing you again, of hearing you, of speaking with you. Oh, but you must be hungry. For myself, I am famished. Let us have supper." They both sat down to table, and when supper was over, they placed themselves once more on the sofa, where they were when Signor Don Issachar arrived. It was the Jewish Sabbath, and Issachar had come to enjoy his rights and to explain his tender love. End chapter 8. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Candide by Voltaire, read by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during January 2007. This is a LibriVox recording. Candide by Voltaire. Chapter 9. What became of Cunegonde, Candide, the Grand Inquisitor, and the Jew? This Issachar was the most choleric Hebrew that had ever been seen in Israel since the captivity in Babylon. "What," said he, "thou bitch of a Galilean, was not the Inquisitor enough for thee? Must this rascal also share with me?" In saying this he drew a long poniard, which he always carried about him, and, not imagining that his adversary had any arms, he threw himself upon Candide. But our honest Westphalian had received a handsome sword from the old woman, along with the suit of clothes. He drew his rapier, despite his gentleness, and laid the Israelite stone dead upon the cushions at Cunegonde's feet. "Holy Virgin!" cried she, "what will become of us? A man killed in my apartment! If the officers of justice come, we are lost." "Had not Pangloss been hanged," said Candide, "he would have given us good counsel in this emergency, for he was a profound philosopher. Failing him, let us consult the old woman." She was very prudent, and commenced to give her opinion, when suddenly another little door opened. It was an hour after midnight. It was the beginning of Sunday. This day belonged to my lord the Inquisitor. He entered and saw the whipped Candide, sword in hand, a dead man on the floor, Cunegonde aghast, and the old woman giving counsel. At this moment the following is what passed in the soul of Candide, and how he reasoned. If this holy man call in assistance, he will surely have me burnt, and Cunegonde will perhaps be served in the same manner. He was the cause of my being cruelly whipped, he is my rival, and as I have now begun to kill, I will kill away, for there is no time to hesitate. This reasoning was clear and instantaneous, so that without giving time to the Inquisitor to recover from his surprise, he pierced him through and through, and cast him beside the Jew. "Yet again," said Cunegonde, "now there is no mercy for us. We are excommunicated. Our last hour has come. How could you do it, you naturally so gentle, to slay a Jew and a prelate in 2 minutes?" "My beautiful young lady," responded Candide, "when one is a lover, jealous and whipped by the Inquisition, one stops at nothing." The old woman then put in her word, saying, "There are 3 Andalusian horses in the stable, with bridles and saddles. Let the brave Candide get them ready. Madame has money, jewels. Let us therefore mount quickly on horseback, though I can sit only on one buttock. Let us set out for Cadiz. It is the finest weather in the world, and there is great pleasure in traveling in the cool of the night." Immediately Candide saddled the 3 horses, and Cunegonde, the old woman, and he traveled 30 miles at a stretch. While they were journeying, the Holy Brotherhood entered the house. My lord the Inquisitor was interred in a handsome church, and Issachar's body was thrown upon a dunghill. Candide, Cunegonde, and the old woman had now reached the little town of Avicena, in the midst of the mountains of the Sierra Morena, and were speaking as follows in a public inn. End chapter 9. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Candide by Voltaire, read by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during January 2007. This is a LibriVox recording. Candide by Voltaire, Chapter 10. In what distress Candide, Cunegonde, and the old woman arrived at Cadiz, and of their embarkation. Who was it that robbed me of my money and jewels? Said Cunegonde, all bathed in tears. How shall we live? What shall we do? Where find inquisitors or Jews who will give me more? Alas, said the old woman, I have a shrewd suspicion of a reverend Grey Friar who stayed last night in the same inn with us at Badajoz. God preserve me from judging rashly, but he came into our room twice, and he set out upon his journey long before us. Alas, said Candide, dear Pangloss has often demonstrated to me that the goods of this world are common to all men, and that each has an equal right to them. But according to these principles, the Grey Friar ought to have left us enough to carry us through our journey. Have you nothing at all left, my dear Cunegonde? Not a farthing, said she. What then must we do? Said Candide. Sail one of the horses, replied the old woman. I will ride behind Miss Cunegonde, although I can hold myself only on one buttock, and we shall reach Cadiz. In the same inn there was a Benedictine prior who bought the horse for a cheap price. Candide, Cunegonde, and the old woman, having passed through Lucena, Chilas, and Lebrixa, arrived at length in Cadiz. A fleet was there getting ready, and troops assembling to bring to reason the reverend Jesuit fathers of Paraguay, accused of having made one of the native tribes in the neighborhood of San Sacrament revolt against the kings of Spain and Portugal. Candide, having been in the Bulgarian service, performed the military exercise before the general of this little army with so graceful an address, with so intrepid an air, and with such agility and expedition, that he was given the command of a company of foot. Now he was a captain. He set sail with Miss Cunegonde, the old woman, 2 valets, and the 2 Andalusian horses, which had belonged to the Grand Inquisitor of Portugal. During their voyage they reasoned a good deal on the philosophy of poor Pangloss. We are going into another world, said Candide, and surely it must be there that all is for the best. For I must confess there is reason to complain a little of what passeth in our world in regard to both natural and moral philosophy. I love you with all my heart, said Cunegonde, but my soul is still full of fright at that which I have seen and experienced. All will be well, replied Candide. The sea of this new world is already better than our European sea. It is calmer, the winds more regular. It is certainly the new world which is the best of all possible worlds. God grant it, said Cunegonde, but I have been so horribly unhappy there that my heart is almost closed to hope. You complain, said the old woman. Alas, you have not known such misfortunes as mine. Cunegonde almost broke out laughing, finding the good woman very amusing for pretending to have been as unfortunate as she. Alas, said Cunegonde, my good mother, unless you have been ravished by 2 Bulgarians, have received 2 deep wounds in your belly, have had 2 castles demolished, have had 2 mothers cut to pieces before your eyes, and 2 of your lovers whipped at an auto da fe, I do not conceive how you could be more unfortunate than I. Add that I was born a baroness of 72 quarterings, and have been a cook. Miss, replied the old woman, you do not know my birth, and were I to show you my backside, you would not talk in that manner, but would suspend your judgment. This speech having raised extreme curiosity in the minds of Cunegonde and Candide, the old woman spoke to them as follows. End chapter 10. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, a LibriVox recording, please visit LibriVox.org. Candide by Voltaire, read by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during January 2007. Candide by Voltaire, Chapter 11, History of the Old Woman. I had not always bleared eyes and red eyelids, neither did my nose always touch my chin, nor was I always a servant. I am the daughter of Pope Urban X and of the Princess of Palestrina. Until the age of 14 I was brought up in a palace to which all the castles of your German barons would scarcely have served for stables, and one of my robes was worth more than all the magnificence of Westphalia. As I grew up, I improved in beauty, wit, and every graceful accomplishment, in the midst of pleasures, hopes, and respectful homage. Already I inspired love. My throat was formed, and such a throat, white, firm, shaped like that of the Venus of Medici. And what eyes, what eyelids, what black eyebrows! Such flames darted from my dark pupils that they eclipsed the scintillation of the stars, as I was told by the poets in our part of the world. My waiting women, when dressing and undressing me, used to fall into an ecstasy, whether they viewed me before or behind. How glad would the gentlemen have been to perform that office for them! I was affianced to the most excellent prince of Massa Carrara. Such a prince! As handsome as myself, sweet-tempered, agreeable, brilliantly witty, and sparkling with love. I loved him as one loves for the first time, with idolatry, with transport. The nuptials were prepared. There was surprising pomp and magnificence. There were fetes, carousals, continual opera bouffe, and all Italy composed sonnets in my praise, though not one of them was passable. I was just upon the point of reaching the summit of bliss when an old marchioness, who had been mistress to the prince, my husband, invited him to drink chocolate with her. He died in less than 2 hours of most terrible convulsions. But this is only a bagatelle. My mother, in despair, and scarcely less afflicted than myself, determined to absent herself for some time from so fatal a place. She had a very fine estate in the neighborhood of Gaeta. We embarked on board a galley of the country, which was gilded like the great altar of St. Peter's at Rome. A Sallee corsair swooped down and boarded us. Our men defended themselves like the Pope's soldiers. They flung themselves upon their knees and threw down their arms, begging of the corsair an absolution in articulo mortis. Instantly they were stripped as bare as monkeys. My mother, our maids of honor, and myself were all served in the same manner. It is amazing with what expedition those gentry undress people. But what surprised me most was that they thrust their fingers into the part of our bodies which the generality of women suffer no other instrument but pipes to enter. It appeared to me a very strange kind of ceremony, but thus one judges of things when one has not seen the world. I afterwards learned that it was to try whether we had concealed any diamonds. This is the practice established from time immemorial among civilized nations that scour the seas. I was informed that the very religious Knights of Malta never fail to make this search when they take any Turkish prisoners of either sex. It is a law of nations from which they never deviate. I need not tell you how great a hardship it was for a young princess and her mother to be made slaves and carried to Morocco. You may easily imagine all we had to suffer on board the pirate vessel. My mother was still very handsome. Our maids of honor and even our waiting women had more charms than are to be found in all Africa. As for myself, I was ravishing, was exquisite, grace itself, and I was a virgin. I did not remain so long. This flower, which had been reserved for the handsome prince of Massa Carrara, was plucked by the corsair captain. He was an abominable negro, and yet believed that he did me a great deal of honor. Certainly the Princess of Palestrina and myself must have been very strong to go through all that we experienced until our arrival in Morocco. But let us pass on. These are such common things as not to be worth mentioning. Morocco swam in blood when we arrived. 50 sons of the Emperor Muley Ismail had each their adherents. This produced 50 civil wars, of blacks against blacks, and blacks against Tonys, and Tonys against Tonys, and mulattoes against mulattoes. In short, it was a continual carnage throughout the empire. No sooner were we landed than the blacks of a contrary faction to that of my captain attempted to rob him of his booty. Next to jewels and gold, we were the most valuable things he had. I was witness to such a battle as you have never seen in your European climates. The northern nations have not that heat in their blood, nor that raging lust for women so common in Africa. It seems that you Europeans have only milk in your veins, but it is vitriol, it is fire which runs in those of the inhabitants of Mount Atlas and the neighboring countries. They fought with the fury of the lions, tigers, and serpents of the country to see who should have us. A Moor seized my mother by the right arm, while my captain's lieutenant held her by the left. A Moorish soldier had hold of her by one leg, and one of our corsairs held her by the other. Thus almost all our women were drawn in quarters by 4 men. My captain concealed me behind him, and with his drawn scimitar cut and slashed every one that opposed his fury. At length I saw all our Italian women, and my mother herself, torn, mangled, massacred by the monsters who disputed over them. The slaves, my companions, those who had taken them, soldiers, sailors, blacks, whites, mulattoes, and at last my captain, all were killed, and I remained dying on a heap of dead. Such scenes as this were transacted through an extent of 300 leagues, and yet they never missed the 5 prayers a day ordained by Mohammed. With difficulty I disengaged myself from such a heap of slaughtered bodies, and crawled to a large orange tree on the bank of a neighboring rivulet, where I fell, oppressed with fright, fatigue, horror, despair, and hunger. Immediately after, my senses, overpowered, gave themselves up to sleep, which was yet more swooning than repose. I was in this state of weakness and insensibility, between life and death, when I felt myself pressed by something that moved upon my body. I opened my eyes and saw a white man of good countenance, who sighed, and who said between his teeth, "Oce sicura de sere senza coglioni." End chapter 11. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Candide by Voltaire. Read by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during January 2007. This is a LibriVox recording. Candide by Voltaire. Chapter 12. The Adventures of the Old Woman continued. Astonished and delighted to hear my native language, and no less surprised at what this man said, I made answer that there were much greater misfortunes than that of which he complained. I told him in a few words of the horrors which I had endured, and fainted a second time. He carried me to a neighboring house, put me to bed, gave me food, waited on me, consoled me, flattered me. He told me that he had never seen anyone so beautiful as I, and that he never so much regretted the loss of what it was impossible to recover. "I was born at Naples," said he. "There they gild 2,000 or 3,000 children every year. Some die of the operation, others acquire a voice more beautiful than that of women, and others are raised to offices of state. This operation was performed on me with great success, and I was chapel musician to Madame, the Princess of Palestrina." "To my mother?" cried I. "Your mother?" cried he, weeping. "What? Can you be that young princess whom I brought up until the age of 6 years, and who promised so early to be as beautiful as you?" "It is I indeed, but My mother lies 400 yards hence, torn in quarters under a heap of dead bodies." I told him all my adventures, and he made me acquainted with his, telling me that he had been sent to the Emperor of Morocco by a Christian power to conclude a treaty with that prince, in consequence of which he was to be furnished with military stores and ships to help to demolish the commerce of other Christian governments. "My mission is done," said the honest eunuch. "I go to embark for Ceuta, and I will take you to Italy. Marche sicura desere senza colpione." I thanked him with tears of commiseration, and instead of taking me to Italy, he conducted me to Algiers, where he sold me to the Dey. Scarcely was I sold than the plague, which had made the tour of Africa, Asia, and Europe, broke out with great malignancy in Algiers. You have seen earthquakes, but pray, miss, have you ever seen the plague? "Never," answered Cunegonde. "If you had," said the old woman, "you would acknowledge that it is far more terrible than an earthquake. It is common in Africa, and I caught it. Imagine to yourself the distressed situation of the daughter of a pope, only 15 years old, who in less than 3 months had felt the miseries of poverty and slavery, had been ravished almost every day, had beheld her mother drawn in quarters, had experienced famine and war, and was dying of the plague in Algiers. I did not die, however, but my eunuch and the Dey and almost the whole seraglio of Algiers perished. As soon as the first fury of this terrible pestilence was over, a sale was made of the Dey's slaves. I was purchased by a merchant and carried to Tunis. This man sold me to another merchant, who sold me again to another at Tripoli. From Tripoli I was sold to Alexandria, from Alexandria to Smyrna, and from Smyrna to Constantinople. At length I became the property of an Aga of the Janissaries, who was soon ordered away to the defense of Azov, then besieged by the Russians. The Aga, who was a very gallant man, took his whole seraglio with him, and lodged us in a small fort on the Palus Meotides, guarded by 2 black eunuchs and 20 soldiers. The Turks killed prodigious numbers of the Russians, but the latter had their revenge. Azov was destroyed by fire, the inhabitants put to the sword, neither sex nor age was spared, until there remained only our little fort, and the enemy wanted to starve us out. The 20 Janissaries had sworn they would never surrender. The extremities of famine to which they were reduced obliged them to eat our 2 eunuchs, for fear of violating their oath, and at the end of a few days they resolved also to devour the women. We had a very pious and humane imam, who preached an excellent sermon, exhorting them not to kill us all at once. "Only cut off a buttock of each of those ladies," said he, "and you'll fare extremely well. If you must go to it again, there will be the same entertainment a few days hence. Heaven will accept of so charitable an action and send you relief." He had great eloquence. He persuaded them. We underwent this terrible operation. The Iman applied the same balsam to us as he does to children after circumcision, and we all nearly died. Scarcely had the Janissaries finished the repast with which we had furnished them than the Russians came in flat-bottomed boats. Not a Janissary escaped. The Russians paid no attention to the condition we were in. There are French surgeons in all parts of the world. One of them, who was very clever, took us under his care. He cured us, and as long as I live I shall remember that as soon as my wounds were healed he made proposals to me. He bid us all be of good cheer, telling us that the like had happened in many sieges, and that it was according to the laws of war. As soon as my companions could walk, they were obliged to set out for Moscow. I fell to the share of a boyard, who made me his gardener, and gave me 20 lashes a day. But this nobleman having in 2 years' time been broke upon the wheel, along with 30 more boyards for some broils at court, I profited by that event. I fled. I traversed all Russia. It was a long time, an innholder's servant at Riga, the same at Rostock, at Wismar, at Leipzig, at Kassel, at Utrecht, at Leyden, at The Hague, at Rotterdam. I waxed old in misery and disgrace, having only one half of my posteriors, and always remembering I was a pope's daughter. 100 times I was upon the point of killing myself, but still I loved life. This ridiculous foible is perhaps one of our most fatal characteristics, for is there anything more absurd than to wish to carry continually a burden which one can always throw down, to detest existence and yet to cling to one's existence, in brief, to caress the serpent which devours us, till he has eaten our very heart? In the different countries which it has been my lot to traverse, and the numerous inns where I have been servant, I have taken notice of a vast number of people who held their own existence in abhorrence, and yet I never knew of more than 8 who voluntarily put an end to their misery. 3 Negroes, 4 Englishmen, and a German professor named Robeck. I ended by being servant to the Jew, Don Issachar, who placed me near your presence, my fair lady. I am determined to share your fate, and have been much more affected with your misfortunes than with my own. I would never even have spoken to you of my misfortunes had you not piqued me a little, and if it were not customary to tell stories on board a ship in order to pass away the time. In short, Miss Cunegonde, I have had experience. I know the world. Therefore, I advise you to divert yourself, and prevail upon each passenger to tell his story. And if there be one of them all that has not cursed his life many a time, that has not frequently looked upon himself as the unhappiest of mortals, I give you leave to throw me head foremost into the sea.
End chapter 12. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Candide by Voltaire, read by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during January 2007. This is a LibriVox recording. Candide by Voltaire, Chapter 13, How Candide was forced away from his fair Cunegonde and the old woman. The beautiful Cunegonde, having heard the old woman's history, paid her all the civilities due to a person of her rank and merit. She likewise accepted her proposal, and engaged all the passengers, one after the other, to relate their adventures. And then both she and Candide allowed that the old woman was in the right. "It is a great pity," said Candide, "that the sage Pangloss was hanged, contrary to custom at an auto da fe. He would tell us most amazing things in regard to the physical and moral evils that overspread the earth and sea, and I should be able, with due respect, to make a few objections." While each passenger was recounting his story, the ship made her way. They landed at Buenos Aires. Cunegonde, Captain Candide, and the old woman waited on the governor. Don Fernando de Ibarra y Figueroa y Mascarenas y Lampourdos y Sousa. This nobleman had a stateliness becoming a person who bore so many names. He spoke to men with so noble a disdain, carried his nose so loftily, raised his voice so unmercifully, assumed so imperious an air, and stalked with such intolerable pride that those who saluted him were strongly inclined to give him a good drubbing. Cunegonde appeared to him the most beautiful he had ever met. The first thing he did was to ask whether she was not the captain's wife. The manner in which he asked the question alarmed Candide. He durst not say she was his wife, because indeed she was not. Neither durst he say she was his sister, because it was not so. And although this obliging lie had been formerly much in favor among the ancients, and although it could be useful to the moderns, his soul was too pure to betray the truth. Miss Cunegonde, said he, is to do me the honor to marry me, and we beseech your excellency to deign to sanction our marriage. Don Fernando d'Ibarra y Figueroa y Mascarenas y Lampurdos y Susa, turning up his mustachios, smiled mockingly, and ordered Captain Candide to go and review his company. Candide obeyed, and the governor remained alone with Miss Cunegonde. He declared his passion, protesting he would marry her the next day in the face of the church, or otherwise, just as should be agreeable to herself. Cunegonde asked a quarter of an hour to consider of it, to consult the old woman, and to take her resolution. The old woman spoke thus to Cunegonde: Miss, you have 72 quarterings, and not a farthing. It is now in your power to be wife to the greatest lord in South America, who has very beautiful mustachios. Is it for you to pique yourself upon inviolable fidelity? You have been ravished by Bulgarians. A Jew and an inquisitor have enjoyed your favors. Misfortune gives sufficient excuse. I own that if I were in your place I should have no scruple in marrying the governor, and in making the fortune of Captain Candide. While the old woman spoke with all the prudence which age and experience gave, a small ship entered the port, on board of which were an alcalde and his alguazils. And this was what had happened. As the old woman had shrewdly guessed, it was a Grey Friar who stole Cunegonde's money and jewels in the town of Badajoz, when she and Candide were escaping. The friar wanted to sell some of the diamonds to a jeweler. The jeweler knew them to be the Grand Inquisitor's. The friar, before he was hanged, confessed he had stolen them. He described the persons and the route they had taken. The flight of Cunegonde and Candide was already known. They were traced to Cadiz. A vessel was immediately sent in pursuit of them. The vessel was already in the port of Buenos Aires. The report spread that the alcalde was going to land, and that he was in pursuit of the murderers of my lord the Grand Inquisitor. The prudent old woman saw at once what was to be done. You cannot run away, she said to Cunegonde, and you have nothing to fear, for it was not you that killed my lord. Besides, the governor who loves you will not suffer you to be ill-treated. Therefore, stay. She then ran immediately to Candide. Fly, said she, or in an hour you will be burnt. There was not a moment to lose. But how could he part from Cunegonde, and where could he flee for shelter? End chapter 13. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Candide by Voltaire, read by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during January 2007. This is a LibriVox recording. Candide by Voltaire, Chapter 14. How Candide and Cacambo were received by the Jesuits of Paraguay. Candide had brought such a valet with him from Cadiz as one often meets with on the coasts of Spain and in the American colonies. He was a quarter Spaniard, born of a mongrel in Tucumán. He had been singing boy, sacristan, sailor, monk, peddler, soldier, and lackey. His name was Cacambo, and he loved his master, because his master was a very good man. He quickly saddled the two Andalusian horses. Come, master, let us follow the old woman's advice. Let us start and run without looking behind us. Candide shed tears. Oh, my dear Cunegonde, must I leave you just at a time when the governor was going to sanction our nuptials? Cunegonde, brought to such a distance, what will become of you? She will do as well as she can, said Cacambo. The women are never at a loss. God provides for them. Let us run. Whither art thou carrying me? Where shall we go? What shall we do without Cunegonde? Said Candide. By St. James of Compostela, said Cacambo, you were going to fight against the Jesuits. Let us go to fight for them. I know the road well. I'll conduct you to their kingdom, where they will be charmed to have a captain that understands the Bulgarian exercise. You'll make a prodigious fortune. If we cannot find our account in one world, we shall in another. It is a great pleasure to see and do new things. Eh? You have before been in Paraguay, then? Said Candide. Aye, sure, answered Cacambo. I was servant in the College of the Assumption, and am acquainted with the government of the good fathers, as well as I am with the streets of Cadiz. It is an admirable government. The kingdom is upwards of 300 leagues in diameter, and divided into 30 provinces. There the fathers possess all, and the people nothing. It is a masterpiece of reason and justice. For my part, I see nothing so divine as the fathers who here make war upon the kings of Spain and Portugal, and in Europe confess those kings, who here kill Spaniards, and in Madrid send them to heaven. This delights me. Let us push forward. You are going to be the happiest of mortals. What pleasure will it be to those fathers to hear that a captain who knows the Bulgarian exercise has come to them. As soon as they reached the first barrier, Cacambo told the advanced guard that a captain wanted to speak with my lord the commandant. Notice was given to the main guard, and immediately a Paraguayan officer ran and laid himself at the feet of the commandant to impart this news to him. Candide and Cacambo were disarmed, and their 2 Andalusian horses seized. The strangers were introduced between 2 files of musketeers. The commandant was at the further end, with the 3-cornered cap on his head, his gown tucked up, a sword by his side, and a spontoon in his hand. He beckoned, and straightway the newcomers were encompassed by 24 soldiers. A sergeant told them they must wait, that the commandant could not speak to them, and that the reverend Father Provincial does not suffer any Spaniard to open his mouth but in his presence, or to stay above 3 hours in the province. And where is the reverend Father Provincial? Said Cacambo. He is upon the parade just after celebrating mass, answered the sergeant, and you cannot kiss his spurs till 3 hours hence. However, said Cacambo, the captain is not a Spaniard but a German. He is ready to perish with hunger as well as myself. Cannot we have something for breakfast while we wait for his reverence? The sergeant went immediately to acquaint the commandant with what he had heard. God be praised, said the reverend commandant. Since he is a German, I may speak to him. Take him to my arbor. Candide was at once conducted to a beautiful summer house, ornamented with a very pretty colonnade of green and gold marble, and with trellises enclosing paroquets, humming-birds, fly-birds, guinea-hens, and all other rare birds. An excellent breakfast was provided in vessels of gold, and while the Paraguayans were eating maize out of wooden dishes in the open fields, and exposed to the heat of the sun, the reverend Father Commandant retired to his arbor. He was a very handsome young man, with a full face, white skin, but high in color. He had an arched eyebrow, a lively eye, red ears, vermilion lips, a bold air, but such a boldness as neither belonged to a Spaniard nor a Jesuit. They returned their arms to Candide and Cacambo, and also the 2 Andalusian horses, to whom Cacambo gave some oats to eat just by the arbor, having an eye upon them all the while for fear of a surprise. Candide first kissed the hem of the commandant's robe. Then they sat down to table. You are, then, a German? Said the Jesuit to him in that language. Yes, reverend father, answered Candide. As they pronounced these words they looked at each other with great amazement, and with such an emotion as they could not conceal. "And from what part of Germany do you come?" said the Jesuit. "I am from the dirty province of Westphalia," answered Candide. "I was born in the castle of Thunder Ten Tronckh." "Oh, heavens! Is it possible?" cried the Commandant. "What a miracle!" cried Candide. "Is it really you?" said the Commandant. "It is not possible," said Candide. They drew back, they embraced, they shed rivulets of tears. "What! is it you, reverend father? You, the brother of the fair Cunegonde? You that was slain by the Bulgarians? You, the baron's son? You, a Jesuit in Paraguay? I must confess this is a strange world that we live in. Oh, Pangloss, Pangloss, how glad you would be if you had not been hanged!" The Commandant sent away the negro slaves and the Paraguayans, who served them with liquors in goblets of rock crystal. He thanked God and St. Ignatius 1,000 times. He clasped Candide in his arms, and their faces were all bathed in tears. "You will be more surprised, more affected, and transported," said Candide, "when I tell you that Cunegonde, your sister, whom you believe to have been ripped open, is in perfect health." "Where?" "In your neighborhood, with the governor of Buenos Aires, and I was going to fight against you." Every word which they uttered in this long conversation but added wonder to wonder. Their souls fluttered on their tongues, listened in their ears, and sparkled in their eyes. As they were Germans, they sat a good while at table, waiting for the Reverend Father Provincial, and the Commandant spoke to his dear Candide as follows. End chapter 14. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Candide by Voltaire. Read by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during January 2007.
Okay, back at it. So that was the book, chapter 14 of the Candide, whatever, by Voltaire. And that's it for today. I'm sore and all that kind of fun stuff, so we're just gonna quit it. I at least got some work done that I need to get done anyway, so yeah. Um, and apparently Josiah's doing some Christmas shopping, and Christy's doing hair. um, okay, I'll let you guys go. I love you, and you have an absolutely wonderful day. Bye.